All right, YouTube. Le Pen is still marching along in France. Things are still looking up for Front National, just as they're looking up for Alternative for Deutschland and some of these other movements. They're gaining rather than losing support over time. We saw the at first admittedly unlikely move in Italy by the Five Star Movement to block their referendum. There ended up actually working fairly well. What was it, like almost 60% of the population voted in favor of their side of the issue to defeat that referendum. Now, the prime minister's gone. Italy's still having problems with a uproar over what the fuck happened. Hofer almost won in Austria. Geert Wilders is still rising up. The European Union is fundamentally dead, everybody. It's dying. It doesn't matter if the UK gets dragged back in and the Brexit never actually happens at this point. It almost doesn't matter. That was a close vote, admittedly. In France, it probably wouldn't be so close. Now, Le Pen has them. She's obviously happy right now. She's maneuvering in such a way that you can see that she's pretty self-assured because she's got Merkel and the others sort of over a barrel. If they don't attempt to fight the UK's leaving the EU, then the UK leaves the EU. The sky doesn't fall. People in France and elsewhere see, oh, well, if we leave the EU, they're not going to retaliate, number one. And number two, it's harder for them to retaliate now because they got one less state to do it with. Number three, our economy will be fine, maybe even grow. Why are we in the EU exactly? We should either demand many more concessions in order to stay in and sort of restore sovereignty, and Le Pen has talked about this, or we simply leave. We simply leave the European Union. This is, the UK and France, they're nuclear states, they're large economies, they're literate, they're technologically advanced. Do they need to be in the EU to survive? No, they don't. France is one of the few countries in Europe that actually, by the way, produces enough food to feed itself. Most countries in Europe don't anymore. Germany doesn't produce enough food to actually feed its own population, believe it or not. Neither, by the way, does the UK. It's funny. People are packed in like sardines in some of these states. They're like, oh, why is the economy bad? We need to pull together. It's not going to help you. You're all densely populated. You have to go over to Eastern Europe to find states that are more self-sufficient. And that's for entirely different economic reasons because there's less industry in some of these places. Now, France is maneuvering for a Frexit. Whether it happens or not doesn't even matter, because if Le Pen is defeated, her movement will continue to gain dominance. And the next time around, it will probably be assured to win. If she does win, she immediately brings about an attempt. She's spoken of this. She's got a 4-point plan, essentially to restore sovereignty over borders, over economic policy, foreign policy, and so forth. And what was the other one? I can't remember what the fourth, and legislative, the ability to legislate one's own laws, limit the influence of Brussels. So that's her 4-point plan. If she's elected and she puts that into motion, what will end up happening? Merkel and all of her cronies that are hardliners, they don't believe in national sovereignty. They don't believe in the ability of a state to conduct its own affairs. They believe in pan-imperialism, essentially. They will fight against it. And if they prevail, there will be a referendum. France will leave the EU. If they don't prevail, then France will essentially no longer be in the EU anyway, because it will have won so many concessions that it will no longer resemble an EU country. And this is what's going to happen, by the way, in the UK. The UK, regardless of what any of these people in UK politics that don't really like the idea of leaving the EU say, is either going to gain more of its own sovereignty back, thus denigrating the ability of the EU to hold other states in the more or less vice grip that they've got them in. They may maneuver for such privileges too. Or it will leave. And that's how the EU dies. It either changes form so completely that it no longer is the European Union. It becomes little more than an economic confederation of sorts, which would be tolerable. You'd have national sovereignty over borders. States would make their own proposals, their own laws largely. Brussels' influence would be limited. The regulatory burden would be stripped back and presumably be little to nothing. It wouldn't be a federation of states anymore. It would be a very, very loose confederation. And it would really resemble Europe before the EU was dreamed up. where, yeah, we're trading, people can move back and forth, and that's all we've got. That's all we need to do. There'd be no EU military. Merkel wouldn't get her shock troops to go commit genocide. Germany would not be able to stack other neighboring states up with economic migrants, thus to harm their economies and prop up German hegemony within the currency bloc. And so Merkel would be toothless. And that's really Germany's goal. Not Germany's goal, but Merkel's goal. Merkel's goal is to make her neighbors so miserable that they have to beg for handouts and then accept austerity, essentially. A reformation of the European economic system. In a way, you can argue she's correct. European states do need to constrain their spending more. They've been spending through the nose for a very long time. The problem is their demographics no longer are going to continue to allow for that. But my belief is that they will restrain themselves. It'll be belated, there will be a lag on it, but they will. When it's necessary, they will come to their senses, not requiring a bunch of regulations and Merkel hegemony in order to accomplish that. I see Merkel as the enemy here. Le Pen is one of the heroes of this struggle. Maybe not Wilders. He said some really weird things. Nigel Farage is a good individual. Hoffer's fine. The five-star movement in Italy's fine. The Swiss never got fucked over to begin with. They're still up in their gravel mountains, essentially, firing their machine guns off and doing whatever else Swiss people do, make chocolate or whatever. It's kind of like the Belgians or something. It's actually, it's great that Brussels is the seat of EU authority. It's over in, chocolate land, basically. What's Belgium known for? Chocolates and not much else. Let's face it. Chocolate kickboxing, I guess. But Le Pen is rising. The Merkels are falling. I believe Le Pen probably will become their next leader. It may not look entirely like that now. I realize that Europe has weird systems. We have multiple rounds of voting, which is, stupid, honestly. Runoff and first past the post and all these different systems. Like, who thought this up? Just vote for who you want in charge and then let them form a coalition. You don't need, round after round of this crap. I don't even understand it half the time. But I think Le Pen will prevail. I think her movement is going to continue to grow. It's certainly going to be the largest in France. Hollande's people are basically, they don't exist anymore. Nobody even talks about it. People are talking more about, it's sort of like the Trump effect. Trump jumps in, starts winning a few states. People stop even talking about Obama to the point where his popularity rises because nobody's looking at the shitty stuff that he's doing anymore like they had been for years. Which, by the way, is why Obama's popularity now is about 50-50 instead of 55-45 against him. His popularity rose because of the same thing that happened to Kasich. Nobody's paying attention to what the fuck he's doing. They're all focused on Trump and Clinton, now just Trump. It's like the Trump effect. People are talking more about Trump than they are the actual sitting president who's in his twilight. You'd think that'd be it's like the end of the Obama era. You'd think people would be reflecting upon Obama's presidency. They're not. They're just focused on whatever Trump's tweeting at the time. It seems like more people are talking about Le Pen, who's not even in a position of power, than the people who are actually in positions of power. And when they do talk about the latter, it's mostly, this is your fault that this so-called far right is rising. None of these groups in Europe are, by the way, even far right. UKIP's certainly not a far right movement, not by any stretch of the imagination. Front National, maybe it was organized by some evil bigot before. Okay, well, I don't think Marine Le Pen really rises to the level of, Hitler incarnate. Let's face it. It's kind of like Trump. People move, younger people especially, move so far to the left that they began to look at even neoliberalism and see it as far right, which is laughable. In the case of Geert Wilders, he'd be a little more of an actual populist, I suppose. It's like that chick who runs Alternative for Deutschland. Alternative for Deutschland's not a Nazi party or anything like that. It's just a modern-day intellectual sort of alt-light party, honestly. Which is to say it's the best thing that Germany has, and they should really consider voting for them. But France has to be liberated first. Hopefully Le Pen becomes the leader of France. That way they can enforce their referendum if they can't get their sovereignty back. Essentially, the test for the European Union will be this. All these states that are defeating referendums in favor of the European Union, becoming more Eurosceptic, and that's across the board, by the way. I don't think there's a state in Europe that's becoming more Europe-friendly in all of Europe. Well, there's the death knell of the EU for you. You can see what direction it's going in. Yeah, far left, far right, it doesn't matter. They're all becoming more Eurosceptic, including some of the mainline parties. The European Union's toast. It's not going to exist in another 20 years, at least in its current form. If it exists at all, it'll be so weakened it won't even be a union. So it's almost not even worth thinking about. Nigel Farage started it all years and years ago. He gets credit. This slightly goofy-looking, slightly drunken English dude will have destroyed the European Union. Good for him. Good for him. You'll go down as one of the greater figures within the UK in modern times. You'll go down as the next Winston Churchill, essentially, when people really see how much better things are without the European Union's full force brought to bear on these individual states. You will be remembered more fondly, let's face it, than you are right now. So Farage gets some good boy, some tendies for that, I suppose. Marine Le Pen will probably do fairly well. And if she is defeated, it's not going to matter. Essentially, I saw a list of the different people running. And the only other main contender there is someone who's even more populist and Eurosceptic than Le Pen is. So what the fuck does the EU expect to happen, honestly, right now? What do they expect to happen? They're going to get another Nigel Farage moment. They know it. They're obviously afraid of this, which is why they're trying to crack down on Front National. It's not going to work. They're doomed. The European Union is doomed. Unless they intend to declare Europe-wide martial law, strip everyone of all liberties, and just become the tyranny that they were meant to be a few decades early, they're not going to accomplish it. And even then, people just riot like they just won a soccer game or something like that. Or, sorry, European soccer, European football, whatever the fuck you call it. The game where you kick the ball around. We call it soccer, you call it football, or I don't understand. Then you call football over here hand egg or whatever. I don't get it, okay? Some of the stuff that goes on in Europe's goofy. But Le Pen's not goofy, nor is the other. It's funny, a lot of these movements are also run by women. That's a smart strategy, by the way. It's going to be women that save, like, the flame of the West. It's not going to be men, because of all the wedge issues that have been piled on over time. You're going to need females to lead these countries. They're going to have to be intelligent, rational, sane individuals. They understand national sovereignty, but a lot of them are going to have to be female. They're going to have to be, because the only way to deflect off the wedge issues of the socialists, the communists, and the globalists in general. It's the only way to do it. They have to be female. There's a reason why Le Pen is accomplishing as much as Nigel Farage in half the time. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why people like Wilders or Hofer are behind, like their contemporaries that happen to have vaginas. There's a reason for that. It's all about European society. Keep a close eye on that. That's why Alternative for Deutschland, Germany may be the third to go. And then the EU's dead. Without Germany, there will be no European Union without the Merkelites. And then you also have, of course, Merkel is supposedly female, and she's the most evil figure currently in Europe. It's great. She's got that sourpuss face. It looks like she hasn't smiled in like 50 years or something. What the fuck is wrong with her? Who pissed in your beer this morning, Merkel? Get a chuckle out of life. Stop being so serious. You're just playing games without frontiers anyway, and pretending that Germany is, the Übermensch state or something like that. Germany's an afterthought at this point. It's going to be the French probably that rip the EU apart. Oh, vive la France. If you manage to do that, great. Yeah. She's proposing an alliance with the US and Russia. I think it's a great idea. 3 major nuclear states, There wouldn't be much of a chance if the 4 westernized, by the way, just to put this out there. If the US, Russia, the UK, and France were to join forces in a military union, we could destroy all the other nuclear states in the world, carve the world up into 4 pieces, and reign over it for the rest of eternity, and there'd be nothing that could stop us from doing so. Just putting that out there. It is possible. Yeah, the UK and France could take back their empires. Russia could re-expand and control all of Asia. We could control all the Americas. And there wouldn't be a whole lot anyone could do about that fact. Yeah. If you wanted dominion, you could accomplish that. The thing is, Trump's maneuvering for that right now, isn't he? because the one holdout in that group, which is Russia, is much more friendly towards him than Clinton. So yeah, it's possible to do that. You want to see true genocide, true imperialism, you might get to see it, let's face it. Unless you see a nuclear war. I have no illusions about the fact that such a move is likely, but it is possible. And certainly maintain the cultures of these states. Of course, there'd be others that would be left alone. I don't think anybody would be invading Germany or Poland anytime soon. I don't think that they'd be sheltered. They become protectorates, honestly. But much of the land of the world would be directly taken over. The world would be carved up into a four-pole world. It is possible to do. Yes, very much so. Before any far leftists get worried about this fact, imperialism's still going on. It's just going on in reverse right now. What you call, these poor refugees that we must feed and clothe, that's a form of imperialism, being led by Angela Merkel. Germany's trying to destroy Europe for the third time, I guess, under the auspices of it was at first it was sort of general, like Prussian-style imperialism and nationalism to an extent. Then it was National Socialism. Now it's just socialism. They took the nationalism away. Now they hate themselves. It's weird how Merkel operates. That's about all. Peace out.